Hello, I'm Dr. Foltz. Today I'm going to talk through my oboe beginner's guide, which you should have a copy of from Dr. Way. The goal of this guide and accompanying video is to give you a solid start at playing the oboe yourself and, as a future band director, to start students on oboe. It's a bit of a cliche, but it is very beneficial for you to get your oboe students to take lessons with an experienced oboist, because the embouchure and reed issues and fingering issues are very different from the other woodwinds, including bassoon. Evolutionarily, you might say oboe and bassoon's most recent common ancestor was probably thousands of years ago, like well before the Baroque period, even the Renaissance probably. So the first thing we'll start out with on the first page of the guide is just putting together the oboe. So as with any instrument, make sure the students have the case right side up when they open it. Usually if it has a handle, the handle will be on the bottom half. And then, first thing, if they have a wooden oboe, especially if the top joint is wooden, it's important to warm it up before you start playing. One good way to do it is just to put it under your armpit and let it kind of warm up as you're putting together the rest of your oboe and soaking your reed. I always recommend putting the bell on the lower joint first, because you can hold the lower joint down here and not be at risk of bending any rods. And then you'll have the bell to hold on to when you put the top joint on. So if your oboe has low B flat, you just want to make sure that the bridge key for the low B flat lines up. Some oboes also have this extra little vent that helps with the pitch of low B flat. A lot of student oboes won't. They both work fine. If you have an oboe that just has two little holes on the side and no low B flat, it's kind of a fun trick, but you can cover those with your knees, finger a low B, and play a low B flat. It's kind of out of tune, but it is a fun trick to show your students. They'll get a laugh out of that. Once you have the bottom joint and bell put together, and your top joint has been warming up under your arm, I'd recommend holding it up here near the finial, this bulb here, so that you don't bend any of these rods down here. And especially on student oboes, sometimes they're kind of cheaply made and they bend really easily, which is unfortunate because they get worse treatment than professional oboes, right? They should be sturdier. But if you teach your students how to carefully put their oboes together, you should avoid a lot of those issues. Some of the bends you'll most commonly run into are on this cluster of keys here. Sometimes the low B and B flat keys will get bent so they won't move independently. I've also seen the E flat key here get bent, or this is something I've been running into recently on student oboes, the post that I don't think it isn't on my oboe because I have more keys, but sometimes the whole post, like one of these posts, that the rods are attached to, will actually rotate a little bit, and then that'll release tension on this needle springs that should be either holding the key open or closed, depending on whether it's a closed standing or open standing key. And then the key will just kind of flop around because the spring isn't working right. So those are just things to watch out for on oboes. Ideally, I would definitely recommend either, if you have like an Artley oboe, those are fine. Linton, if it's in decent repair. Those are some of the older, very simple beginning oboes. Usually those don't have low B flat or the left F, but if they're in good repair, they can be a really good place to start, as long as all the keys close. If you're looking for something just a little bit nicer, I really recommend Fox oboes. Their models 330 and 333 have a modified conservatory key system, which has basically the keys you need to play just about anything. Yamaha also has some really good intermediate and beginning oboes, and recently I've been really into Howarth oboes. This is a Howarth with a synthetic top joint because wooden oboes almost always crack. So if you get the opportunity to buy an instrument for your school, I highly, highly recommend getting either a fully synthetic bore or at least a synthetic top joint, because this is the part that most commonly cracks. Often you can look for these issues on your school oboes if they're wooden. It'll crack between these two trill keys here. It's a very common place, or through here between the B key and this trill key. Basically, oftentimes the wood is not aged adequately, and the grenadilla wood that they're made out of has been over-harvested and I don't think it's endangered, but it's certainly a threatened species. So the quality of grenadilla wood in general is kind of dropping. Same for clarinets and piccolos. But the cracks are just, even with really good grenadilla wood, really great oboes, they just really tend to crack. So that's why you gotta warm them up, oil the bore if it's wooden. And if you see a crack in one of those spots, you'll have to send it off to get it pinned and repaired by a really trusted professional, not your local music store. They should not be doing that kind of work on your oboe. But so once you got your oboe put together, we'll put the reed in, but then we'll take the reed out and practice embouchure. But with the oboe, you always push the reed in all the way. There's a little shelf, which I don't know if you'll be able to see in the video. You won't. Look down the bore of the oboe, and you'll see that there's a little shelf that stops the reed from going in any farther than it needs to. It's basically the staple of the reed, which is the metal tube that we tie the cane onto. This little conical piece of brass or nickel silver completes the bore of the instrument. So the oboe goes lengthwise from the bottom of the bell here all the way to the top of the staple up here. So when you don't push it in all the way, you get this little air gap, and if you pull it out a little bit thinking you're going to make it flatter, it'll make it a little flatter, but a big issue is it will not affect all notes the same. So then you might have some notes flatter, but the intervals between the notes will be all different. So unfortunately, the biggest thing on the oboe that affects pitch is the reed itself. And even if you have kind of an iffy reed, then it's the embouchure and your air that affect pitch. So you want to make sure that you start out with a pretty good quality reed, because that's going to have the biggest impact on your pitch. So another good reason to get your students into lessons is they can either buy reeds from their teachers, or their teachers will have good recommendations for reliable places to buy reeds. And I will also include with the packet that Dr. Way will give you a list of some of the best oboe retailers online where you can buy handmade reeds. All right, let's talk about embouchure. So on the next page, we talk about forming the embouchure. So we did talk real quick about the parts of the reed. This is an American scrape reed. I'm going to insert a comparative picture of an American scrape reed and a European scrape reed. And of course, they can both sound beautiful, but they're different playing styles. So here in the US of A, we use the American scrape, which was developed by Marcel Tabuteau, who taught at the Curtis Institute in the earlier part of the 20th century. He studied at the Paris Conservatoire, and but he came here and he developed his own reed style that we still mainly use today. There's modifications, and each person's reeds are a little bit different. But in general, you can see how the tip is thin. I had a good angle there where you could see through it. The tip is thin. There's a thicker heart, and then this is difficult to see on the video, but behind it again, it's thinner in the back here. You can see how there's kind of a ridge or a spine down the middle of the reed. All these different areas and thicknesses help to make easy response in the reed, and then a darker tone color and more stability, not so much wobbly sounds if it's an unbalanced reed. So a good reed test is, you've got your tuner, We do what is called a crow. So in this case, we're not forming an embouchure. We're just putting all of the cane in our mouths just to let it vibrate freely and see what it does. So I put all the cane in my mouth up to this string because I want to see how the cane functions on its own without any help from my lips. And that's pretty good. Ideally, in a perfect world, your reed will crow octave Cs, about C5 and C6. This one was just a hair flat, which is fine. It also depends oboe to oboe what kind of a pitch your reed needs to be at. But when you hear a reed that has a ton of pitches in it, when you crow it, which I should have soaked up another reed that I knew was going to be real crazy. Here, I'm going to crow. This is actually a Baroque oboe reed, but it'll give you an idea. Now that might work fine for a Baroque oboe reed, but if you hear all those pitches together on a modern oboe reed, you know it's going to be very wild. So we can do a little test that way. All right, so setting up the embouchure. You do need to soak your reed just for a little bit. They'll vibrate better. And I usually recommend having a little shot glass or medicine cup or something like that. There, you can get them in silicone, so then you can just throw it in your case and you don't have to worry about breaking it. Always a good plan. We used to recommend film canisters, but nobody has film canisters anymore. And students don't even know what a film canister is. So, shot glasses, the way to go. Once it's soaked, you'll want to, when you have it in the oboe, you'll play at about a 45-degree angle from your body. Not straight out like a trumpet, not quite as far down as the clarinet, just in the middle, about 45 degrees. So you start out by pushing together your lower lip so it makes a nice firm base for the reed. And it's going to be just a hair over your lower teeth. You put the tip of the reed on your lip, about to where the wet part of your lip starts. Draw that together. You roll it in just a hair. Keep the corners of your mouth together and down with a little bitty frown. And bring the upper lip down over that. So a little toot should be pretty high pitched. The idea is you want to have a firm embouchure around your reed, but not pressing down on it, certainly not biting. As you can see in the picture, your teeth should be separate. If they're too far apart, you're going to play flat a lot, but that's, if you're troubleshooting, that could be something to look at. But in general, you should have some space between your teeth and a firm, but not tight, contact with the reed on all sides. I really recommend also The Beginning Oboist by Valerie Anderson. She owns Genet Inc., which is another oboe supply company. Her book, which you can buy online, and I will include a link, gives you a really nice historical overview of the oboe. You can almost teach yourself oboe with this. I really like her embouchure description as well, which I'll go over here. She uses a couple of syllables to put your mouth in the right shape. If you use an O sound, that brings the corners of your mouth in, O, and moves your face forward. And an E, O, E, make sure that brings your mouth in just a hair. Or if you kind of combine them, she suggests the vowel sound as in earn. So if you go and put the reed in there, that small embouchure with a little bit of a frown, no smiling in oboe playing, is a pretty good start on there. So I recommend students that they frequently reset their embouchure until it feels really, really natural. So it's a lot of reminding students to, stop, reset your embouchure. You got too much reed in your mouth. That's a really common mistake with oboists. It helps to, sometimes when you really can hear the difference between a really tight embouchure, like if I you can hear that kind of, it's just really tight, versus a nice relaxed embouchure. It helps the students to hear the difference and then self-diagnose when they're practicing alone. Another good test to make sure that you're using a good relaxed embouchure, this one I got from the John Ferrillo's excerpt book. He is with the Boston Symphony. At least when he wrote this book he was. He may not be anymore. He recommends making sure that you have a sufficiently relaxed embouchure by playing a long tone on A, soft, loud, soft, and then when you're soft, slurring down to low D. And any tension in your embouchure is going to make that impossible. So that's a really good test. And then you can do it on other pitches too, other leaps of a fifth, right? Practice it on C or G to C, do B flat to E flat. Just long tones will never hurt you, right? All right, so we talked through the embouchure. We talked, when you do have the reed in the oboe, you always push it in all the way. Here's a cautionary story. I was helping a middle school student get started on the oboe, and he was putting his oboe together, and he said, so how far do I push the reed in? And I said, oh, you push it in all the way. And he just kept going and going, and I looked at his oboe, and somebody at some point, he had borrowed an oboe from his middle school, had drilled out the top of the bore here. So it was, essentially it was like a Baroque oboe, and there was nothing there to stop. Like on a Baroque oboe, there is no little ledge. Anyway, that oboe was probably never going to be a good oboe again. So if you do run into any, oboe horror stories like that, just, try to get your student a different oboe. But in general, you should be able to push the reed in all the way, and it'll just stop. All right. Posture, of course, was on the next page in the packet. Posture is going to be the same for any instrument. I see a lot of students trying to play with their chins really low, and I try to demonstrate for them. When I'm talking like this, you can hear how constricted my voice and breathing is, versus if I'm sitting with my head up, my airflow isn't restricted. Similarly, when I'm playing like this, it's real tight, and that's even with a good embouchure. It's much more open. You can breathe. So make sure the students hold their stands, move their stands up high enough that they're not tempted to play like this. So head position, remind them that their trachea, their windpipe, is going down your throat here. And if you go like this, you're putting a kink in it, so you can't blow right. With the hand position, it's very common, I think, for students to get really, really tight on the hand position. So I try to tell them, when I see them with a very tight hand position, maybe their fingers are very flat on the keys, to put your hand at your side, let it relax naturally. You get a pretty nice, relaxed C shape. If you just insert the oboe in there, that's a pretty good shape. You will run into your left hand ring finger, sometimes locking, just due to where the keys are. But you want to make sure that your students are placing their fingers not on the very, very tip and not flat on the pad, but right in between. Like if I'm putting my fingers on my thumb, that's the part of the finger that should land on the key, because you want to be able to cover those little tone holes in the keys. Even when you are reaching, for example, for the left E flat key, which we will get to later, it can be a big issue. So if your student is trying to play a left E flat and it's just squeaking, they've probably accidentally opened the tone hole in this key. So remind them to not let their pinky finger affect whether this hole gets covered. Also be careful that your students aren't letting their pinky fingers hang down below the oboe. Obviously, eventually when you want to use these pinky keys, your fingers need to be ready for action. So better not to get in the habit of having lazy pinkies early on. And with the half hole key, which we'll talk about a little bit later too, up here at the top, it's not a real half hole. On bassoon, you actually do have holes that you do cover halfway. But this one is set up so that you fully open the little hole in the key while keeping the key depressed. So you want to set up your first finger on your left hand so that with a small rocking motion, you can open that half hole. And you use that for raising the C sharp / D flat, D sharp / E flat up an octave. And then on some of the higher notes when you get into the third octave. But it should just be a small movement, because sometimes you have to go really fast. Let's say you're doing, just a B flat major scale. You have to open it real quick from C to D, keep it open for E flat, and then close it when you get to F. So it should be small movements so you can play that as quick as possible. We discussed the playing position, which is about 45 degrees from your body. Too high, and the high notes or the low notes are actually harder to play. If it's too low, you'll be restricting the reed. Actually will lay on your chin, and that'll restrict the vibration as well. Breathing on the oboe requires a lot of air pressure, but obviously you're putting all that air through a very small opening, which, ideally the opening at the reed, it's a little, the camera reverses things. I can't figure out which way to go. It's kind of an almond shape. So at the apex of the curve, it should be basically 1 millimeter. If you have one of those reeds that's super open, we always say you could drive a truck through that. That's going to force you to bite to keep it closed so that you can get the pieces of cane to start vibrating against each other. So that's going to cause a lot of issues if you're getting the habit of biting your reeds closed. It'll make your lips hurt faster, your pitch will be bad. So look for reeds that once they're soaked, and maybe with a gentle squeeze, especially if they're new, you get an opening that's about 1 millimeter high at the widest point. So I have an exercise in here with the reed alone to practice playing with good breath support. So you're sitting or standing with proper posture, taking a deep breath. You'll feel your rib cage expand and your diaphragm descend because you are creating a larger cavity in there to hold more air. Form your embouchure and blow into the reed, adding air pressure until it produces a C. You might start out flat, add air pressure, not lip pressure, until it produces the correct pitch, a C in this case. So then memorize the air pressure, the embouchure you had, and try to start right on that C with your tongue on the reed, then release it so it vibrates. And that will help the students get used to playing with support, fast air, focused air, and a good embouchure. Because if your embouchure is really, really loose, which is a better place to be than really, really flat, or really, really tight, you'll always be flat. But I feel like it's easier to work on adding just a little bit of tension until you get to where you need to be versus trying to loosen up a really tight embouchure. That is kind of like I call it a target practice exercise that I'll have students do sometimes. You have to read in the oboe, play a note, and try to, with a tuner, so you have an objective pitch reference, try to land, set up your embouchure carefully, have your air prepped, and try to land right in tune on different notes. For example, if they find that they're not putting enough air through it and they're consistently flat on like the second octave A flat, let's see, I'll play it flat on purpose here. They need to start there, add air pressure till they get to where they need to be, and focus. You want to pretend like you're blowing out a candle far away. When they figure out where they need to get that air, then you can start right on there with that note, that air pressure cued up behind the reed, and practice landing right in tune. Something you'll run into on student oboes is a G sharp / A flat that really, really wants to drop an octave. So sometimes you'll just have to take extra care to really focus that air to keep it from dropping down in pitch. That's an unfortunate thing that happens on beginning oboes sometimes, like the instrument itself. I can still get it to do it on my oboe, but it's much easier. I can be lazier with my air and not have it drop an octave, versus on a lot of beginning oboes, you have to be really, really conscious of using a good focused airstream, or it will drop down an octave. So next, we'll talk about articulation. The important thing, you just want to make sure that your students are articulating with their tongue on the reed and not puffing, right? Because eventually you'll run into a time when that is not going to be fast enough. Also, it sounds bad. So I like to have them start out just by speaking, saying do, 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 where have them notice that the air stays steady. You just interrupt it. You're articulating the duh sound, in this case with your tongue on the roof of your mouth, but the air is staying the same. Do, 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 do. And then I'll have them, you can either do this with the reed in the oboe or just reed by itself. Call it a whole note. Nice, steady air. So they keep that air stream focused and steady, not letting the pitch change throughout the note. And then add in that articulation. Say do, but instead of on the roof of your mouth, on the tip of the reed. So you want to make sure that they are continuing that air and that support and not letting there be a noticeable silence between the notes. Obviously, if you're doing staccato, it's a different thing, but it's best if they can default to this nice legato style of playing, because it's easier to later add in the space to make a beautiful staccato. But a good practice, just reminding them that the air continues to go, they're just interrupting the vibration of the reed with their tongue. We talk about vibrato. We probably won't get into vibrato very much. I think a great thing, I know I kind of had my little vibrato breakthrough just singing by myself in the basement. I feel like the mechanism of producing vocal vibrato was very similar to producing vibrato on the oboe. It's not jaw vibrato. Make sure that your students aren't producing vibrato by wiggling their heads, which I've seen. It has to it's in your throat, really. But I just send them off to listen to some recordings, have them sing along at home alone, practice that ah kind of you'll feel how it happens in your throat, and that oscillation in the airstream kind of translates to vibrato on the oboe. This is the crash course, so that's all the vibrato we're going to get into. All right, so fingerings on the oboe. We're on page 7 now. Oboe's fingering system is called the conservatory key system, which I mentioned. The flute, clarinet, and saxophone have Bim fingering systems, which was developed by Theodore Bim. There were actually Bim oboe and bassoons made, but the revamp of the key work and the way the different tone holes had to be drilled and everything changed the timbre of the instruments a lot, and they really never caught on in popularity because they didn't sound like oboes and bassoons. Interestingly, the Bim oboe was pretty popular in Spain for a while, but today everyone uses conservatory system except in Vienna, where they have the Wiener oboe, which is a little bit more like a classical oboe, as in like about the time of Mozart, a little bit later, really. It has more keys than the classical oboe, but it's kind of a different branch on the tree. All right. This is kind of funny as you read here. In the book The Oboe in the Yale Musical Instrument Series by Jeffrey Burgess and Bruce Haynes, they refer to the conservatory key system as an aggregation of key work, because there's been some revamping and changes, but a lot of it is just continually adding things rather than redoing things. So the oboe has things that we use like forked fingerings, which you'll see on other instruments too, of course. But it's a unique fingering system. So I mentioned this is kind of where you get into a little bit of woodwind history, or maybe physics, I don't know. There's basically 3 ways to play notes outside of an instrument's basic scale. This is for any instrument. Generally, our woodwinds, when we're trying to produce the Western scales, you got 6 main holes. And with everything closed, that's kind of the basic key of the instrument. That's in the oboe, it's D major. All open is sort of a C sharp. And then you are into the next octave. So to play notes outside of that main scale, you've got 3 options. One is to just drill a whole new tone hole, which is what we did for F. There's a tone hole on the side here between the E key and the D key that is just for F. So doing that gives you a really homogeneous scale, so the timbre stays the same. So since they each have their own tone hole, they're all going to sound timbrally about the same. The second way is forked or cross fingerings. On the oboe, we have very commonly forked F, which is one of our alternate F fingerings. And most oboes today, modern oboes, have a resonance key down here for forked F, which will make it sound very similar to regular F. You can hear it's just a hair sharper. On like a beginning or intermediate oboe, there's going to be a much bigger difference in pitch and timbre than on my oboe. Here is what forked F sounds like without a resonance key, just for reference. Very fuzzy, very covered. That's why some older fingering charts will tell you to put down E flat on forked F. If you have the resonance key, don't do that, because then your F will be really sharp. There are occasions, like if you're doing a really fast scalar passage and you use forked F and your pinky finger stays on the E flat key, it's going to go by so fast nobody will notice. Like that. Not a thing to worry about. Technically also, C and B flat are forked fingerings. So just the thing to keep in mind with those is they can tend to be sharp. So it's important for your students to listen carefully and adjust their air as needed to keep those in tune. And the other way is with half holes or twinned holes, which we don't have anymore on the oboe. The half hole is a little bit different because it's an octave mechanism and not 4 semitones. As you probably remember from the bassoon part of woodwind methods, they have real half holes still on the bassoon. So it's pretty cool. It's a throwback to Baroque instruments. You might remember playing recorder in elementary school, which is a real instrument. Don't make fun of the recorder. Look up some amazing recorder recordings. There's great literature for that. Recorder and Baroque oboe have twinned holes, and that is another way. For example, the oboe, even into I believe the 19th century, the oboe had twinned holes for G to G sharp. But now we have again a separate tone hole drilled for that. Just a little fun fact. All right. So another weird thing about the oboe is the octave mechanism. So of course, for some notes, there's just a whole different fingering. Low B flat to the next B flat up. Totally different fingerings. The half hole is used for C sharp, D flat, D sharp, E flat. And I'm trying to be really consistent with using enharmonic note names, because I have been recently running into a lot of students who are not familiar with enharmonic note names. So I'm trying to make sure that they know, outside of the world of just intonation and different like mean tone temperaments, in modern band music, D sharp and E flat, same fingering. But if you see a D sharp, you have to know what to do. So for that C sharp, D sharp, you use half hole. Then we use the back octave key. Now you might notice too, there's two back octave keys here. This one is called third octave key, and it is used for the third octave, E, F sharp, getting into the stratosphere of the oboe range. So I think by 9th grade, students should be able to play up to high F. I think that's pretty reasonable. But even if you don't have a third octave key, you just use the second octave key and it still works well. But in this case, don't worry about third octave key. So for the next, basically third, you use the back octave key for E, F sharp, G flat, G sharp, A flat. And then from A flat / D sharp, you switch to the side octave key. And because the oboe has what's called a semi-automatic octave key mechanism, the side octave key cancels out the back octave key. So you can keep the back octave key down if that makes for a faster fingering change, because the side octave key will cancel it out. So for A sharp / B flat, B and C, use the side octave key. Once you get above the side octave key C, then you're in the third octave, and the fingerings change a lot. So we won't get into those today, but if you, of course, most band books will go up to high F. If you have questions about fingerings like that, the Woodwind Fingering Guide online is a really excellent resource. It's got, especially when you get up into the third octave, many options. It has trill fingerings. I highly recommend that website. We talked about the half hole earlier. You should be able to go move just your finger, just a little rocking motion to open it up. I recommend students isolate going from C to D to practice opening and closing the half hole. Just isolating little note patterns like that makes such a big difference. Alternate fingerings. There's a few on the oboe. It's not too crazy. Most of them are basically, we've got keys doubled on either side so that you don't have to slide between keys. Hopefully, there's a few you do have to slide. The biggest one that you'll encounter is F. So you should default to regular F, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this kind of half circle key here, which opens the tone hole in the side for F. So this should be your default F. So if you're playing C major, you'll use F. But when your F is before or after a note that uses your right hand ring finger, then you'll want to use an alternate F fingering. So your second choice should be left F, which if your oboe has one, is on top of this left hand pinky cluster of keys. And it opens the same tone hole as regular F, so they should sound identical. So you go D to F, D to F, and get a perfect slur. Because if you hear your students going, oh, I'll do it with my oboe held up enough so you can see it. If they're trying to jump their ring finger from D to the regular F key, they're going to get an extra note in between. So then they've got to remind them to use an alternate F. If they have left F isn't a great option. If they don't have left F, then forked F is fine. In fact, from D to F, that's a very easy one because you just have to lift your middle finger. And remember, since even most beginning oboes do have the forked F resonance key, you don't need the E flat on forked F. If their oboe doesn't have an F resonance key, maybe for pitch, you might need the E flat. As long as they understand why they're adding it, and that in the future, if they get an oboe with a forked F resonance key, they don't need the E flat. But if that's too much information for your middle school oboe students, just get them to play without an E flat on their forked F. The next one is E flat. So we have E flat for the right pinky. It's the lowermost of this cluster of keys. For left E flat / D sharp, you use the left pinky, which is the roundest key, kind of the innermost one of this cluster here. And it opens the same hole as E flat, so it'll sound exactly the same. You want to use that before or after D flat or low C. So when you're getting into like A flat major, you want to have them use the D flat instead of trying to slide between the D flat and the E flat with their right pinky. We try to avoid sliding where we can. There's a few places you have to, but not with D flat to E flat. I recommend check out my KMEA demonstration video for this year, 2024. In those excerpts from this year, there's a lot of alternate fingerings needed. So looking at those excerpts, thinking about those are really good for practicing your alternate fingerings. The other one, which you won't run into a whole lot, is you have left and right A flat. Right A flat is on the side here. Left A flat is on the top of this cluster of keys. They open the same hole again. I don't use right A flat very much at all because it can be a little challenging because it also holds open your F sharp key. But it's good to know. Sometimes if you have a passage where you have to go from A flat to E flat, it can actually be easier just to press down A flat and E flat together with your left pinky versus trying to use right A flat. But that becomes really important when you get into the third octave because you'll use A flat and E flat together on the high E and F. All right. So now we're into maintenance on page 10. Very important to make sure that your students have a swab or their oboes will get very gross. Just so gross. So when you're putting your reed away, just make sure there's no extra water in there. It's really, really important that they get a reed case. As you can see on my paper, I recommend the kind with little slots that the reeds can go in. This, holds them all separate. The ones with little pegs that you put the reed on, if there's not a spring in there that holds them in place, they tend to just kind of flop around in the case, and then the tips get broken. So I really like these are the cheapest ones I found are sold by Hodge Products. They're a plastic case. They have a little foam ribbon in there that holds 3 reeds. They have been, they're under $15. And getting one of those, if you can explain to the parents that if you just buy one of those, it'll help their reeds last a lot longer than if they try to keep them in the little, we call them reed coffins or tubes that the reeds come in from, you know, wherever you ordered them, that the reeds will last longer and they don't have to buy as many reeds, then try to get them to buy a reed case. So a swab can either be a pull-through swab, which usually has a tail at the end to pull it back out the other end if anything happens, or it could be a swab that you pull partway through and then pull back out through the bell, like this one, for example. Both are good. Just good to know what kind you have. So this swab is too big to go through the whole oboe. So you just pull it back out the other end. And that's pretty good because then you can feel pretty safe that you're not going to get the swab stuck in the oboe, which is something that happens pretty often if you're not careful. Definitely make sure that before you start, your swab is fully unfurled and there aren't any knots, because if you look down the bore of your oboe, it is very, very narrow at the top. It can be handy to have some cigarette paper around. It's really common for water to get into the octave keys on oboes. So if you're playing, especially the second octave key, and you hear some while you're playing, swab your oboe and then put some cigarette paper underneath that key, close up all the other holes, and then hit the octave key to kind of blast out any extra water in there. So then it'll get rid of that sound. Sometimes, I have never had a reed grow mold, but I've had a lot of students have reeds grow mold. So, make sure that they know what that looks like. It'll be little black specks on the reed, and make sure that they stop playing on that because that's gross. And then buy a reed case, brush your teeth before you play. I've seen some really gross reeds. Remind them, of course, to always swab. If they have a wooden oboe, it's super important to swab because you don't want that water to sit in there and soak into the bore. And even if they have a plastic oboe, the water could soak into the cork pads and make those not last as long. It's also good to remember to wipe out the interior of the tenon part here, because water will collect in there, and if you just let it sit, it gets very gooey. So wipe that out. I hate having to work on students' gross oboes, so I try to get them to swab consistently from the beginning. So big thing, if the swab gets stuck, and if it's stuck in the upper joint and there's nothing hanging out the bottom, the tail into the swab, don't stick anything up the oboe unless it's like one of those specific swab extractors. And even then, be really, really careful because you don't want to scratch the inside of the bore. It might be best to just take it to a reputable repair person who will probably cut it off at the top, and then with a pair of pliers, kind of like pull it apart thread by thread. I got, back in high school, the swab stuck in my high school's English horn, and I took it to Judy Dietz, and that's what she did. She pulled it out thread by thread. So you just have to work real carefully. Best thing is just make sure that you fully unfurl your swab. And I think that might have been what happened with that oboe I mentioned earlier, where the reed well had been drilled out. Maybe the swab got stuck and that's how they tried to get it out. So stay calm. Just take it to a repair person. The other thing, if your reed has a big crack, I drew a little picture here, split down the middle, you can't repair that. That's a goner. They'll have to get a new reed. So if you can get your students to always have at least 3 working reeds and kind of rotate through them, that'll be ideal. I know I spent way too much of my time in middle school and high school nursing along one reed, and that's a very stressful way to live. So make sure they know what a reed in good repair looks like. And if you can, again, get them into lessons so their teacher can help out with that kind of stuff. So thank you for watching this video, and if you have any questions, send me an email. Dr. Way has my contact info, and of course with Washburn you can look up my email in the server. So all right, thanks. I'll see you around campus. Bye.